Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast Network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
I could spend the rest of my life just reading.
Hello and welcome to Sundoku. I'm Cath Keneally.
And I'm Annie Hastwell.
And today I will be talking to a friend of mine and a great New Zealand novelist, Damien Wilkins.
And I'll be looking at how to curate a second-hand bookshop. But first, Cath, what have you been reading?
Well, this is my holiday reading, Annie. I've been away for a couple of weeks. There is a fabulous tip shop, would you believe, on the way out of Hobart, where a whole lot of people obviously leave their holiday reads, and you would be amazed at what you can find. I picked up a biography of Molly Keane, the Irish author, who wrote in the 20s and 30s as M.J. Farrell, and then had a renaissance in her later life and wrote under her own name as Molly Keane, and nearly won the Booker Prize with Good Behaviour. And she writes about the Anglo-Irish ascendancy and the decline thereof in the early 20th century, and she is just fantastic. And this is a biography of her by her daughter, Sally Phipps. So I ploughed through that and loved it, would recommend it without hesitation if you can find it. I think it's from about 2022. And then something completely different, Alexei Sayle, the comedian and writer. He thinks of himself very much as a writer. I picked up a novel by him called Overtaken, and I would recommend it. It's Alexei Sayle, all right. You can hear his voice in it. It's very biting, very clever, very astute. He's politically very astute and black and a little bit gothic. And all you probably need to know is that, yes, Overtaken is a good title for it because it's about the aftermath of what happens when a car crash kills most of his best mates on the M1. And it's about his apparent recovery and a dark twist at the end.
Well, the things you find in tip bookshops, my version of that is the local book box, the council-provided book box, which I do love, although I'm worried about how many people read airport novels with gold writing on them. And there's recipe books, lots of recipe books.
Maybe they're just the ones they throw away.
True, because that's probably what I would throw away. Yes, you're right there. So I picked up a couple of books there, and one of them is called The Tenderness of Wolves. It was actually a 2006 novel set in Canada in 1867. And once I opened it, I couldn't stop reading. It's wonderful. It's a great era, and the people in the book who are, very marginal settlers in still remote, freezing and quite dangerous Canada are part of the clearances from Scotland. So they've all been kind of kicked out of their little tiny bit of land in Scotland and ended up in Canada. So you get a picture of, what was happening in the world at the time, as well as the thoroughly good story with a mysteriously killed and scalped hunter found in his cabin and people missing. And I haven't got very far with it yet, but I'm really, really enjoying that.
Good. On today's program, you'll be meeting Damien Wilkins. He's written 14 novels. He's a New Zealand author. He's also a musician. He's a multi-talented man. His first novel won a major prize in New Zealand, and this latest one is doing the same. The latest one is called Delirious, and it's a kind of double portrait of two ageing people who are husband and wife who have a tragic loss in their background, and they're facing a big final step.
And after that, we'll be looking at how to style a second-hand bookshop. I went and visited an extremely cool little bookshop in an arcade in Adelaide called the Orchard Bookshop, which I find it very hard to walk past any time. I usually drift in and end up buying something I didn't intend to buy. Mm-hmm. So I went and had a chat to the owners of that about how they only pick books that they themselves would read.
And now to meet Damien Wilkins and his novel Delirious. The main characters are Peter and Mary. Peter is a librarian and Mary is a retired policewoman. and various things are going on in their lives. They've got a tragedy behind them, and at the moment they're dealing with the delirium/dementia of Peter's very feisty mother. So I said to Damien that I noticed he'd dedicated the book to his mother and one of his sisters, and I asked him whether there was a real-life connection between them and the story.
I guess for me, if I think in a very sort of personal way about the book, I think of my mother's, what's happened to her in the last few years. So basically that is more or less that the novel's mother is my mother's story, and that she came down with this delirium quite sort of shockingly and very suddenly, rather than a kind of slow descent into dementia, someone clearly, losing where they put their car or missing something and, losing words. It really was not like that at all. So the sort of the sudden crash of my mother into delirium, and then her failure to come out of that, which was one possibility, which, the medical staff had said this may resolve in a few days or a few weeks, but it hasn't, and she's still in this state. So her life went from a life of utter competency and richness. She was reading novels and looking after the house and looking after grandchildren one minute, and the next minute had lost that whole world. So that's really, for me, the emotional, or one of the emotional parts of the book. And so I gave that story to Pete's mother. As you get older, you start thinking about what might be ahead, and so clearly for Mary and Pete, they're thinking of those examples that are in their pasts, what's happened to their parents as they think of their next move. But also that what interested me about my mother's story, and I tried to get that into the novel, was the way in which that kind of mental collapse, and it's now indistinguishable from dementia, so that's what we kind of have as a diagnosis. But it was a very strange version of it, because my mother still knows us all and knows her life very well, but she also has this astonishing narrative gift now. So she just tells stories all the time, and they're often stories which start in, a sort of firm base in reality, and then might move to something a bit more fantastical. But it's also, I feel, a sense, there's some aspect of her personality which has been allowed to weirdly flourish under the license of her new setting. So I don't know what it's like for her, but to us, she's also a source of delight and comedy, as well as pain. So I tried to get at the complexity around that, rather than just paint it as, utter loss. There is also another side that I want to get at.
You've obviously done a lot of thinking about this state and that whole business of losing the self, and whether that is really what's going on. Peter is interested in the sheer labour, as you say, that his mother puts into reinventing her history. And Margaret is a new person too, and the new Margaret is real too. And Peter has the sudden thought that now was her real life, that her newfound capacity to articulate her inner life was vastly meaningful. And that is quite an intriguing thought to play with, because she has been liberated to a large extent, and she confabulates these absolutely amazing new backstories for herself.
Yeah. And actually, it was interesting when I launched the book last year in Wellington. I read from a letter that we'd found in my mother's bedroom, her bedside table drawer, where she had kept this letter. The letter had been returned to her by a girlfriend, and my mother had written to her friend in New Zealand. So my mother at that stage was living in southern Rhodesia. It was called then, so Zimbabwe as it became. And she writes back to her girlfriend in Wellington about her time then as a 22-year-old, I think. And it's all about, it's sort of comic romantic adventures with three would-be suitors of my mother in this kind of strange, setup as expats in southern Rhodesia. And it just struck me, she's a very funny writer. She could really do it on a sentence level, and had enormous control, and was sort of a storyteller. So I did say something about that. I thought it felt in some ways like my mother's life as a life, if not a life denied, a life diverted by having a family and, you know, assuming that role, and slotting into a kind of domestic existence, which really, in this letter she writes home, she says something like, "Oh, I can't think of anything worse than marriage." You know, and then she comes home and has all of us kids. You know, she had 7 children and lived you know, like a life of, you know, I'm sure of interest and reward in many ways. But it did feel like there was something in her that was turned down and off, really. And anyway, in the launch, just to finish this story, at the launch, when I was signing books, quite a number of women who were at the launch came up to me and said, "Oh, she sounds like my mother." So you know, that story of women's lives which were turned in different directions away from, you know, what might have been interesting, passionate pursuits. That's what I wanted to capture on the page. And there are other things going on in the book, but for me, if I think of the book immediately, those scenes are the ones that I kind of think of. Pete thinking about his mother. There's a scene where I'm just remembering now, if I think of the book, there's a scene when he drives his mother back to her old house, and he has the thought when she's put in the dementia ward that he's assured by the people there, the carers, that the dementia patients tend to like to come back to the dementia ward. Pete sort of feels vaguely annoyed when he's told this, as if his mother is somehow missing something if she wants to go back to that place, which is, she's got no independence and she's got no freedom of movement, so why would you want to return there? He also wants that for his mother. He wants the safety, he wants the kind of reassurance, he wants someone to care for this person that he can't care for. The emotional to and fro you feel as a child looking at your parent to whom this is happening is also something I wanted in the book, and maybe that to and fro of the emotional world leaks out all over the other sort of scenarios the characters are into.
It does. I think that's what was about, that toing and froing all the time. Peter, of course, is in a cleft stick. He doesn't know quite how to deal with the situation. They're kind of insoluble problems. And if we go back to Peter and Mary, they're dealing with insoluble things too. The long story of the grief of the loss of their son. I think we meet Mary first. You take her down to the coast 40 years before the present. It's soon after that event we get a sense of her very strained mental state. I think maybe we find out in that early part too that Mary has been a policewoman and stopped being a policewoman soon after the accident that happened to their son. I thought of asking you why you made her a policewoman.
I can't really honestly remember why or when I decided that she had to be a cop. It wasn't sort of consciously I'm going to do a gender swap, but I have always been interested in writing women and finding the kind of pressure points in their lives, and to give Mary this job, which back then in New Zealand would have been still quite unusual to be a female police officer. And I thought there was just some kind of dramatic potential there, given that what happens to their son also inevitably involves the police and involves the kind of professionalization of trauma. So she's sort of trained to deal with trauma, and that felt to me to be an interesting position to put a character in, whereas Pete, who, you know, loves books and is probably the more vulnerable of the two, isn't trained to think about trauma in this way. And so just to play out that business of how the effects would echo through both of them. And also, I guess I wanted to paint a portrait of a marriage over a long period of time, of just having two people who have lived together with this and through this moment. And also the idea that this wouldn't necessarily mean they had talked about anything particularly, that their avoidance, tactics were pretty solidly in place, and they acted with care towards each other through a kind of avoidance, quite a common thing, rather than for people to talk through everything that happens.
It's certainly about the mutations of grief through a lifetime, and then how it oddly sharpens your insights into other parts of your life. I mean, Pete and Mary are having flashes of insight into what Will was really like, what was happening back then, that are somehow prompted by the reappearance of the trauma. It just shoves their perspective a different way.
It can be really problematic, can't it? How much grief do people allow you to have? Because there's a sort of feeling that we're allowed a certain amount and then we should just move on,
Definitely.
or it's improper. It's improper to harbour anything more than your allotment. And then, life is life, we say, and we all move on. But of course, these things, they do tend to hang around and they break through at really bad moments. And so I did want to capture some of that intractable nature of grief and loss, that rather than a feeling, the stone in the shoe or whatever analogy you want to make, but a sense that none of this is settled.
And you do that through lovely, vivid flashes of, say, for instance, I think Pete's remembering how Mary dealt with the news of what's happened to Will on the camp that they've sent him on. And she's been up all night packing sandwiches and a thermos flask, and because they're going to the site. And they completely miss each other there. All you have to do is just give us a kind of filmic vision of how differently they're both dealing with the news to make us realise what's going on.
It felt unrealistic to me for them to have a heart-to-heart at this point. Rather you would get on with your own part of this domestic realm and muddle through.
And lots of flashes of their working life past highlight how they've evolved through all of this. Mary thinks back to being in the force quite soon after the event and the people dealing with the fallout. And I'm quoting, "The smell of the correction fluid he was constantly applying is coming into her brain." In D.I. Pearson's Covering Dabs, Mary had felt her son really disappearing.
Yeah, her police work, clearly what's happened to her makes her a kind of unreasonable person, so that's her problem. So she's clearly, and knows it, feels that she's not having the right attitude at work, and she's somehow become the person who, with the dead son, that's sort of her identity now. It makes her kind of hostile in some ways and unpleasant to be with. So I wanted to sort of play out some of those things rather than to just show a kind of pro forma sadness, or to a character who's just completely undermined. The other, I remember one scene actually, which I was really happy to have written, thinking about the grief in her work, is a scene when she picks up an elderly woman and drives her to a church. And this is before really she's admitted anything, and she hasn't really sort of spoken about her grief. And she has to lean over in the police car to unlock the seatbelt from the elderly woman who's having trouble getting the seatbelt off. And the woman just places her hand on Mary's head and strokes her head for a while, because she has told this woman that she's lost her son. That, for me, I just thought, when I wrote that scene, I thought, oh, good, I saved myself 50 pages of trying to get at what a scene like that, what it would emotionally, what it means to be in that position of having.
We haven't even talked about the retirement village. I just want to say I thought that was very funny and also dreadfully frightening. But I want to talk about Claire and the sibling relationship. So Mary's sister Claire is the other untimely bereavement in the book, and that keeps coming back over and over. And of course, Claire's last period in hospital too is kind of a foil for Margaret's being in hospital. I wondered whether you were just thinking all of those interludes.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast. Ozcast. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Between the two sisters, say to me, you're thinking about how sibling relationships never really change?
Yep, for sure. Yes, I wanted to give Mary her family life, and whenever I think of a novel, I think of families. That for me seems to be the operating principle. I remember actually my friend Nigel Cox, who never really sort of did families until very, very late. His novels, often had sort of solo people and wanderers and unattached lives, really interesting and really good books. Yeah, and just I was thinking how striking that he sort of didn't have the family. But for me, and I don't know, who knows, I come from a large family and full of interesting women especially.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's had a profound effect. I've got 5 sisters. So for me, when I think of drama, I think of my sisters and just sort of, the underground circulation of secret and not so secret hurts that erupt from time to time. And even when you're way into your adulthood and you're supposed to have somehow solved everything, these moments they just come back with such vivid force, and you realise it's all there.
Damien Wilkins, New Zealand author, talking about his latest novel, Delirious, from Te Herenga Waka University Press. That's the Victoria University of Wellington.
And now to a bookshop I love. It's tucked away in the historic Adelaide Arcade. It's very different from your average secondhand bookshop. I do love secondhand bookshops, but they can be dauntingly stuffed with old paperbacks. Orchard Books is more like a beautifully laid out museum of fascinating books. I took the mic down there and did a tour with the owners, Nick Patrick and Kate Treloar.
We do have a very small number of books compared to almost every bookshop you will see anywhere else, and that's very deliberate. So each book needs to earn its place, so whether it's a classic or a personal recommendation or just a beautiful item, it needs to have something special about it to earn a spot in here. This also means that when people come in, they can avoid overwhelm. Most bookshops, they do have lots of fantastic offerings, but they're often buried amongst thousands and thousands of offerings, and it can be difficult to latch on to which particular thing you want. But we have everything laid out in an extremely spaced out way, and the idea is that when you walk in, you can have a bit of a look around, and hopefully something will jump out at you because everything's well selected and everything's very clear to see.
And Nick, you're the other co-owner of Orchard Books. Can you take me back to the idea that got this started?
Yes, well, I think it went back to Kate and myself wanting to do something on our own and not wanting to work for somebody. And we established a small, tiny secondhand bookshop in the beautiful Adelaide Hills. We've been very fortunate to be in beautiful locations pretty much our entire existence. It's sort of blossomed from there. We were fortunate enough to prioritise a couple of trips around Europe and see what was happening on the European continent with regards to books and with regards to small business and the way that they trade over there in England and France especially, and brought back a few ideas. We started up a pop-up bookshop where we were literally just popping up on the streets. We would have a couple of hundred classics for people to stumble across, and we sort of built on that as the pop-up bookshop, and have basically just grown from there, I guess, and just refined our offering, trying to specialise in really good books.
It seems like you've survived the books are dead era when we saw a lot of bookshops roll over. So secret is to be quirky, to be different. Do you think you have a secret?
The books are dead narrative has been around the whole time that we've been around, which is now getting on 18 years. And I've observed that books themselves aren't really at risk. So a lot of people see ebooks and it's like, oh, ebooks will take over. And while there are some issues around that and physical books still are very important, I'm not saying that books themselves are at risk. But what is at risk is independent bookshops. So I guess I'll say the A word, but yeah, places like Amazon, which are extremely predatory, focusing on destroying independent bookshops, and they're doing a really, really good job. So the statistics of bookshops closing around the world is horrifying. Our secret is probably a little bit of luck, a fair bit of determination. We have an extremely lean business, so part of our hand-picked model means that we don't have anything excess, so we don't put any money into anything that we're not 100% devoted to. And I think that's helped us just be able to stay ahead of the curve the whole time. But it's no secret that, it's been extremely difficult. And I look to the future of independent bookselling with extreme fear of what's ahead. And I put the call out to every single person who cares about culture, information and truth to support local independent bookshops. It's really, really important.
To me, when I walk into this bookshop, the secret is that I have no intention of buying a book, but I just can't resist browsing. And a lot of it's to do with the covers and the way that you've arranged them. And I usually do end up buying one or two things. So it's in the curation. Is that something you change constantly? Like, what principle do you use?
You're right, we do change constantly. So we're always rolling out stock. I think it probably stemmed from Kate and I recognising that we were never salespeople. So when we set up a bookshop, we needed it to basically have books that sell themselves. So we're comfortable with our selection process. We love books and we have a real passion for the books that we select. And we hope that when people come in, they see that passion and they see the effort that has gone into it, and then it's more a case of being comfortable in the space. And like you said, if you find something that attracts your eye, then you'll pick the book up and you'll look at the blurb, and if it's a book that Kate and I have read and loved, and that's pretty much all the selling that needs to be done, so it's a selection process and a presentation process which forms the basis of the selling.
I guess too, the sense that you can't look at a book and think, I'll just go to Target and see if I can get it cheaper there, or go onto Amazon, because these are unique. They're secondhand, so they've got a history behind them and they're not necessarily available now. So that would be part of it as well.
Absolutely. So we don't do mainstream bestsellers. We do have a few new books in here, so that have been particularly selected for a particular reason. Maybe they're a little bit more unusual, or we just happen to passionately like them. But on the whole, if you pick up an item, it will be a good option to purchase it then and there. And we actually have it happening constantly, that people will decide to go and see if they can get it cheaper somewhere else, or think about it, and they'll come back sometimes the next day, and almost always it'll be gone. So that's the way this shop works. We have interesting things, and once they're gone, they're gone. So I think a lot of people have learnt that the hard way, and we do find that works well. We have interesting things, grab them while they're here, and then next time you come in, there'll be a different range of interesting things.
Let's have a quick look around the current display and what's here this week.
Probably our main stock in trade is doing beautiful copies of classics. So up here you can see we've got all the old favourites, so numerous copies of Alice in Wonderland, so a pop-up one, a new one, illustrated ones, older ones, a vintage-looking one. We also have a nice older copy of Charlotte's Web, Wind in the Willows, same sort of range. There's a mix of price points and a mix of new, vintage, illustrated. So if you are looking for a classic, especially for a gift, there's a really interesting range of looks and prices for people to choose from things that they know what the material is, and that they know they can trust that these will be well-received gifts, for example, or they'll enjoy them themselves.
My eye was immediately caught, by Einstein in Kafkaland and this fascinating display over here. What's holding all that together?
So this is basically our graphics area. So with our business, there's a lot of peaks and troughs, and it depends largely on what sort of collections are available. And we have recently purchased a couple of sizable collections of graphic novels, etc. So we don't usually have this many things, but there's a whole heap of stuff in the window, Batman and the Predator and Spider-Man and all of that. But then we do have some staples, graphic novels like Mouse and Watchmen and Asterix, Tintin, those sorts of things that continue to speak to people. The book that you're referencing, Einstein in Kafkaland, is actually a new one. So when we do get a sizable collection, we can sort of top it up. So there's a couple of graphic novels that have been released recently over the past 24 months that we use the opportunity of having a good selection to showcase them as just something a little bit different again. That one is a wonderful book. We have just run out of probably my favourite recent release, which is a graphic rendition of Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which is quite spectacular. And we've also just sold, I think, a graphic novel copy of 1984, which is, again, just a wonderful artistic rendition of a classic book that we love. So
You must have some great conversations in here.
Yeah, it is definitely not boring. We've always said, it doesn't matter what niche interest you have, somebody's written a book about it. So we do literally get the full suite of people come in through the store. So, and book people, as a rule, are passionate people. So they might have their own particular area, and their knowledge is far advanced of what our knowledge would be in their particular topic. So it's always wonderful. We do get to have these conversations with people that are passionate about their subject, and that means that we're learning all the time as well, and which is what they say, if you're learning something every day, then that's what keeps life interesting, and we certainly we do learn a lot.
When you say you come across collections, how do you do that? And I guess, is there a moment that you can remember where you got something really special that was extremely exciting?
We get regular inquiries about whether we buy books. That is a part of our business, so all the time, so every day. People are looking to either downsize, or perhaps they've been left in a situation where they're in charge of cleaning out an estate or sorting out a big collection for whatever reason. So they'll contact us, and if it's aligned with the sorts of things that we have in here, then we'll head out and take a look and work out the best way for everybody to be happy. So whether we take the whole collection or just pick some, it's all done on.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
A case-by-case basis.
Let's just go for a quick stroll around today's selection. We've seen Alice in Wonderland and the graphic novels. What else?
We actually find that our science fiction and fantasy shelf does really well. A lot of readers would perhaps not list science fiction or fantasy as one of their topics that they're interested in when they're reading, but we do a broad range, and we do find that a lot of people, when they come and look at the section, might find more names that they recognise than they realised. So things like Asimov or Pratchett or Tolkien. And so even people who would normally just perhaps describe themselves as literature readers do often have a bit of a rummage here and find, some classics in an area that perhaps they didn't realise they were interested in. So we do find that happens a lot. So there's lots of great books in the science fiction section.
What we've always focused our bookshop on is having a focus on good books and not be pigeonholed as a secondhand bookshop or a new bookshop or an antiquarian bookshop. So to that end, we've always really enjoyed being able to get some beautiful collectible books. So we do have some on display in a couple of cabinets. and it does really range with what we have, but it always reflects our own personal interests. So there is a number of classic science fiction books in here, through to a signed Patti Smith book, and some miniature books which are 200 years old, and then some beautiful leather bindings of classic texts like Slaughterhouse-Five and 1984, Les Miserables, some signed copies, Janet Winterson, China Miéville. So it's something that we really try and curate as well, so that you might come up and you will see a collectible copy of Pride and Prejudice, and then we'll have a reading copy on the shelf, and then we might have just a nice, $40 gift-worthy new book of that same title, so that people they're coming in here and they're seeing good books, not just new or secondhand.
These tiny books are quite high priced, which they probably should be, because I've never seen anything like that before. What was the idea with those? What era do they come from?
So these are all printed in the 1820s. They're featured as diamond classics and diamond poets, and the publisher, as a selling point, used a diamond tip on the printing tool to create the text. And so even though the writing is minuscule, it is still quite sharp. So with probably the aid of a reading glass, you would be able to read these quite easily.
It actually looks like the bottom line when you have your eyes tested, doesn't it? The one that nobody can read.
Yes, it does. So physically, they're about 9 centimetres tall by 3 or 4 centimetres wide. And the idea was that if you were touring the continent, you would take a stack of these and you would have poetry on hand. And, if you were out and about for a couple of months, it's sort of like a 19th century Kindle. You've got everything there, and you can read it at your leisure.
Have you got a current favourite?
No. It's really, that one does get asked a lot, but generally the favourites that we have tend to go pretty quickly. So I would say at the moment we've got a couple of beautiful deluxe limited edition copies. One copy of Neuromancer that we have, which is celebrating the 40th anniversary that it experienced last year, which is a beautiful limited edition, which is signed by William Gibson. That one's pretty special. The most recent editions, we've got some very early Nancy Drew books. So, you remember from your childhood, but these are very special, very rare early UK printings. So they've just hit the shelf. So whenever something new comes in, I guess we're constantly getting new favourites,
That would be one of the pleasures, I suppose, of the job.
Oh, definitely. Most of the things that we put in here are interesting to us. So, it's as far as buying books that we think will sell, that's not really a part of the business that comes into it. So we basically get sold by the books to ourselves first. So if we love the book, then we just hope that, or trust that someone else will love it as well.
Nick Patrick and Kate Treloar run Orchard Books. If you are in Adelaide, go to the Adelaide Arcade and check it out. You're listening to Sundoku, the podcast for anyone who sleeps in the shadow of a tower of books.
Well, I haven't been reading much, but I have been listening to fabulous audiobooks. And the most recent one was The Year of the Child by Niall Williams. And I have just finished listening to, prior to that, a book called This Is Happiness. And what his approach is that he's basically starting off his novels in a very small town on the west coast of Ireland, and he's working his way from the 50s through to, somebody asked him at Writers' Week, where will you embrace the internet? And he said, no, I'll stop before then. It would get too complicated. So This Is Happiness kind of set up this village small town of characters who then reappear in The Year of the Child. It's not a prequel or a sequel. They are independent, but it's a little bit richer if you kind of know the backstory. And it's basically a doctor living with his eldest daughter who just really has never married and sort of is the daughter who stays looking after the widowed father. The other two sisters have gone and made their lives and seems reasonably happy, and then a baby shows up on the doorstep, brought in by someone who's found it. And it's all about the subterfuge involved in trying to keep this baby and not have the authorities. Ostensibly, that's the plot, but because of his amazing observations of just village life and the quirks and foibles of every character, it's kind of a very rich tapestry. I won't give away the ending, but it's not a tragic ending, which is kind of refreshing these days. And it's not sentimental. I guess for me, I thought, wow, I felt good when I finished reading it, but I didn't feel I'd been played either.
That's it for today's program, podcast 52 of Sundoku. We've got to the middle, towards the century, and we're heading forward. And looking forward, we've got a couple of thrilling rural noir, Aussie rural noir coming up. Mm-hmm. The Reunion by Bronwyn Harvey.
And Panic by Catherine Jinks.
And Cath, you're talking to someone who's won so many prizes. We're in awe of him.
We are. I am. I'll be talking to Brian Castro. Yes, he's won every literary prize, I think, in the universe. And his latest book is a fascinating one from Giramondo Press, and it's called Chinese Postman.
Looking forward to picking his brains.
Yeah.
What's the secret of winning every prize? So time for us to go.
And thanks for listening. I'm Cath Keneally.
And I'm Annie Hastwell.
This podcast is produced by 4 book addicts refusing treatment.
Sarah Martin,
Annie Hastwell,
Michaela Andreev,
and me, Cath Keneally. Our thanks to composer Quincy Grant for the music. If you want to find out more about the books and authors featured in this program, check out the show notes. And you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sundoku Cast, which is TSUNDOKU Cast.
Are you a podcaster? Maybe you've got that big idea and you're looking for a network to join. The multi-award-winning Ozcast network can get your content to eyes and ears all over the world. Join now for the first month free, and you could be featuring this sound at the beginning of your podcast.
Ozcast.
Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.